Sego Sewaguego. I'm Candace Maracle, and I'm a journalist and reporter with CBC Indigenous. Today I'm standing in front of the Woodland Cultural Centre, formerly the Mohawk Institute, Canada's longest running residential school. This is the place where my grandma went, and I haven't been back for years because I don't like coming here. And this is a tough week for a lot of Indigenous people. But I did curate you a playlist. The playlist you're about to see has some lighthearted pieces that are wonderfully Indigenous. The first is an explainer of the word Indigenous from CBC Kids. And I love this piece because instruction starts with our youth, and I think that is central. So a lot of the pieces, the playlist that I've curated for you today are intended to kind of take your mind away from truth and reconciliation this week and into kind of what is inspiring, what is empowering, what is educating for youth, because that's where it starts. Anyway, I hope you enjoy my playlist. Again, CBC Indigenous for CBC Explore. Check it out.
What is Indigenous?
It means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place.
So, Indigenous people are...
Me. Hi, Sid. Hi, Ruby. Indigenous people are the first people to be living in a place. Indigenous people, like me, have lived here for over 12,000 years, long before it was even called Canada. Around 1.4 million people identify as Indigenous in Canada today.
Hi, Sunny. You're Indigenous?
Yep, I'm Algonquin First Nation.
So, which word should I use? Indigenous or Algonquin First Nation?
Well, most Indigenous people would rather be called by the title of their nation. Algonquin, Cree, Haida, Mohawk. But if you don't know what nation someone is, it's better to use the word Indigenous.
Is Indigenous the same as Aboriginal, Native, and Indian?
Actually, those words aren't used as often anymore, Sid. In some cases, those words can even be hurtful.
In Canada, there are 3 different groups of Indigenous peoples: the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit. The First Nations is the largest and most varied group, and they are found all over Canada. They include my nation, the Algonquin First Nation, and many others like Cree, Haida, Mohawk, Ojibwe. The Métis are the descendants of First Nations peoples and the European settlers who came to Canada, and they are all across the country. Finally, the Inuit are the Indigenous peoples of the Arctic, and they are also found all across the country.
So many amazing groups of people.
That's right. And think about this. Each nation has their own culture with their own languages, laws, and spiritual beliefs. The First Nations alone include over 50 different nations with 50 different languages.
Wow!
Respect!
And those cultures had, and continue to have, a huge influence on Canada, giving it words, inventions, concepts, and games that are used by Canadians today, including that canoe and this kayak. The country's name, Canada, comes from the St. Lawrence Iroquois First Nations word, Kanata, meaning village or settlement.
Thanks for sharing with us, Sunny.
Happy to. And remember, if you know what nation someone is, you can use that to describe them. If not, use the word Indigenous.
Got it. Whoops.
Sometimes there are things that you take part in that you just don't quite know how or why they started, but you know you like them. So how do traditions become traditions? And does the origin matter if it means your community comes together?
You might call it Victoria Day, May Long, or the May 2-4 long weekend, but here on Six Nations of the Grand River, it's something different. For more than 150 years, there's been a day dedicated to bread and cheese. Now, I'm a member of the Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, where there is no bread and cheese day. So I'm heading to the Grand River in southern Ontario to see if I can sniff out the history behind the holiday.
It's just a tradition that we were taught as young children, and that's just part of our history and part of our family history as well. They say, well, I got to go to bread and cheese, so.
Janina Hill has been volunteering for more than a decade bringing smiles to hungry faces.
There's always a competition between people who can be the first in line. Some people will get in line at 10 o'clock, even though we don't start serving it till noon.
So if I'd line up nice and early, is there a chance I could get some bread and cheese?
There's a chance. Just don't come like at 12:30 thinking, or quarter to 1, thinking you're gonna get any.
You know any of the history behind this day and how the tradition started?
No, not really, not me.
The Queen, something with the Queen.
Gave a gift to the natives for helping them.
She wanted to make sure we didn't go hungry.
So how did this become the celebration that it is today? Well, that's a little bit of a mystery. What we do know is that Six Nations people served in the War of 1812 and served well. Grand River members earned a reputation as formidable soldiers, so the Queen gifted them blankets.
Then popular history has it that sometime in the 1860s, Queen Vicky sent money instead and asked her people to send bread and cheese. Her motives? Also a source of speculation. Some say the food was a one-off, a true recognition of friendship with her allies, the Six Nations. Others, though, say it was a strategic move. Rather than spend a lot on expensive blankets, she chose something much cheaper. The tradition was well entrenched by 1899, 2 years before she died, when a reporter produced a detailed account.
The government provides this gigantic feed once a year, and no less than 600 loaves of bread and 500 pounds of cheese and 100 pounds of biscuits are consumed upon the occasion. The bread is a quarter loaf and the cheese is a good-sized chunk.
124 years later, some things haven't changed. By noon, the line stretches on and on and on. From the local arena's back door, down the street, around the block, waiting, waiting, and waiting. And then, the wait is over.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thank you.
Within 2 hours, 9,000 loaves and 9,000 pieces of cheese are gone, and I'm left chewing over the day's deeper significance.
Bread and cheese is an example of how that relationship can be not so fraught or not so toxic and not so complicated. Sometimes it can be joyful.
Down the road is the old council house built in 1863. Historian Rick Montour tells me it was here the traditional Six Nations, also known as the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Council, sat until 1924. That's when the Canadian government removed them from power and when the Crown Six Nations relationship started to go sour. But it's also where the first documented distribution of bread and cheese took place in 1874.
History is kind of caught up with us. People disregarded First Nations claims to sovereignty, our very existence, our languages, all those sorts of things, and we're fighting back, and we're here to tell that story. This story that was never meant to be told 100 years later, we're still doing it.
Especially in the world of Indigenous politics and in the world of Indigenous current affairs, it's easy to get weighted down with the heaviness of that burden. But on a day like today, you can just forget about all that. You can forget about the conflict. You can forget about the difficulties and the intergenerational trauma that impacts you in your daily life. And you can just have fun. And there's something beautiful and uncomplicated about that.
But before I leave, there's one more burning question I need answered.
How do you guys like to eat your bread and cheese? You just eat it straight out?
Straight, right off
like
the
that?
block. Oh, yeah.
Do some people take it home, make a grilled cheese, maybe?
No. I don't think I've ever seen anybody make their bread and cheese home.
I do like to take my bread and cheese home.
So there's some debate.
I'm the straight up, just old school type. Take a big bite of the bread, the hunk of the cheese, and enjoy.
How do you like to eat the bread and cheese?
Oh, both hands.
Welcome to Ganawage. Come on in.
Ryland Diome is preparing the biggest catering job he's ever done, a meal for 300. His menu includes one of his specialties, corn soup.
Different places. This one is turnips, carrots, green cabbage, of course corn, kidney beans, and then a pork base. That's how we do it here in Kahnawake.
He's looking forward to feeding a mixed crowd, from on and off reserve, to share some traditional dishes.
What's become traditional, at least, because this being a pork-based dish, pork wasn't predominantly something we used or had, so it's a little bit of what you could say, or what I like to call post-colonial cuisine.
Diome is trained in French cuisine.
Having such an interesting, colorful past with the French particularly, I find it funny that I, Mohawk nowadays, am using French techniques to help elevate Mohawk food.
But he hasn't gotten any pushback.
It doesn't make the food any less delicious, or doesn't make me any less Mohawk to prepare things in a French way. Okay, I'll cut this carrot this way, right? The way I cut it. But then I'm gonna cut this carrot like this. What that shows is like different people cooking together. So this is basically the stock I made.
Sage is one of his secret ingredients, but he didn't reveal the other ones.
Haudenosaunee people, Gehaga people had food abundance. Food wasn't something we worried about, So I do big portions because of that.
Diome's actually getting ready to open his own restaurant in the new year.
Considering surviving genocide, surviving everything my people have survived, it's a privilege to still be here, to cook things that my ancestors cooked, and to, again, kind of revitalize this stuff.
Amy Lowe, CBC News, Montreal.
So where are you from?
Island Lake, Manitoba.
Island Lake, and where are you from?
I am from Fisher River, Manitoba.
And where are you from?
South Indian Lake, Manitoba.
Okay, so what was your first experience with Res Radio?
My first experience, just background noise pretty much, and my kukum would always listen to it, and I don't know, she would turn it on in the morning right away, and we'd just hear it in the background all the time, and I don't know, just same music and the voice, and I don't know, it's just memories now when I hear it now, being grown up, and it just feels kind of nostalgic.
It's Tanager at 904-7252. Let's get back to some more music here on BON FM. Here's some Timberland with Justin Timberlake and Nelly Furtado here on BON FM 90.9.
It's only been just over a year since 90.9 BON FM hit the air in the Broken Head Ojibwe Nation. And right around that same time, Mike Maple started his dream job.
Res Radio is different just on the community aspect of, being Nietzsche native and passing that knowledge on.
On air, he's known as Uncle Mike, and he loves to play and listen to music all day long.
Hey everybody, welcome back to BON FM 90.9. That was Ariana Grande with No Tears Left to Cry. I hope you guys are having a good time.
He also does news announcements, makes commercials, and does live hits out in the community. He is the only person working at this radio station, and he takes every opportunity to get others on the air.
Tacos, if you guys want to call it, be specific about it. But we need our people in the media because not only it builds jobs, it builds truth, and we can get our stories and stuff out there.
There are just over 150 Indigenous radio stations in Canada. Some have been in operation for over 40 years, and some are just starting.
First time I heard it was when I went with my cousin to visit his grandparents in Peguis.
Oh, yeah.
And they were listening to the radio and doing bingo. I think a song that reminded me of back home would be Ernest Monius, If I Wanted You, Girl.
Can you sing it a little bit for us?
No.
Just kidding.
So what's some songs you would always hear?
Oh, you know, like Hank Williams and all the old tunes, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because that's what because they go by more of the older generation, right? Like what they want to listen to. Because a lot of the young kids, they want to listen to hip hop and all their stuff that you can't understand.
Even the bougie Nietzsches reminisce about Res Radio.
Like any AC/DC.
I was just going to say, any AC/DC is a classic.
Yeah, like Thunderstruck for sure.
Another fan of AC/DC, musician Garrett T. Willie, points to some older but classic Res jams.
Indian Car, I think. I used to hear that quite a bit, and it wasn't played on very many other radio stations, so that comes to mind. A lot of John Fogerty, Bob Seger, Taking Care of Business, Randy Bachman, of course.
Res Radio is basically just a radio station on the res, like BON FM, but with very little oversight to operate. Mostly anything goes. That's because back in the late 70s and early 80s, the CRTC recognized the need for Res Radio and thought of ways to make it more accessible for remote First Nations. And so when you were out there, did you listen to their radio station?
Well, you had no choice. What else are you going to listen to? Wi-Fi is crap. So.
Would people call in?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
What kind of things did you hear on there?
A lot of crazy stuff.
Stations could be set up as long as they're not interfering with other commercial stations and weren't broadcasting too far away from the res. And because these stations are limited in human resources, they aren't required to do a lot of the paperwork, like keep music logs. That way, the res stations can just focus on their programs, supporting community efforts and language.
So we're going to do a Buffalo Bingo, get that going for the radio station to start generating money into the radio and into the community. Once we get that going as well, we're going to start employing people weekends, evenings, nights, on locations and everything like that too. Everything in between.
But Maple envisions a future where these stations are more connected with each other to share news and information more widely. He says it would be good because so many of us have connections to more than one First Nation.
Be that brother-sister relationship where we should all be coming together instead of trying to be separate individuals and in different radio rooms where we should, if we all come together, our news, our music, everything gets out there.
It's waking up in the morning with my grandparents. It's all you would hear. Saturday mornings cranking up the fiddle tunes or Johnny Cash, all the old singers.
Someone who knows a little something about operating Res Radio is Pat Richard. Richard is one of 4 DJs from Sandy Bay First Nation Res Radio 106.3 FM. He started volunteering 12 years ago, the same day the station opened up.
I'm William Patrick Richard. I'm a DJ of Sandy Bay, our community. If you want to listen to 106.3 FM, just tune into sandybayradio.net. That's all you gotta do. All the good music's there.
It was August 23rd, 2011 at noon when Sandy Bay Radio first hit the air. As soon as he heard it, he drove straight down to what he now calls his radio shack to be nosy and hasn't left since.
But I loved it. I still love it. That's why I'm still here. I don't think I'd like to quit this job. I love it.
Richard is on the air early in the morning, Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. Requests for George Jones, Don Williams, and Charlie Major come in all the time from Sandy Bay and beyond. So when you hear one of those songs, how does it make you feel?
It takes you back to my younger days. That's how I feel. I go, whoa, now I'm 15 again. I had to start giving her,
And with the help of the internet, he has listeners from all around the world as far as Greenland and Afghanistan.
All these songs tell stories, and the people that request songs, you feel the people out there that call in for requests, how they feel, how they go, and how they move along.
He also makes sure to play Indigenous artists like the Dodium Boys, Delaney Moniaz, and the Masu Boys. While he does have the occasional fiddler or singer-guitar player in, he'd like to see his Radio Shack expand a bit more so that he can have full bands live on air. As a musician himself, Richard would like to promote the local talent as much as he can. He also takes the time to include Ojibwe.
Yes, I do speak in my language. I'll do the weather in my language. I'll speak it out in my language, what the weather's like, and I speak the time. Like right now, 11:30 is the time, is what I said.
At the end of the day, these two DJs are living out a dream.
I've never worked since I started because I'm loving what I'm doing, and that's just a great place to be.
I love the music. The people love the music. The people are awesome. Beautiful people out here in Santa Bay. I got lots of family out here.
Through the airwaves and beyond.
Santa Bay.
All the way. That's what we always say.
My name is Jerry Lee Pengman. I'm from Peguis First Nation.
My name's Kim McPherson. I'm from Peguis as well.
We're here to honor our sister Jennifer Dawn McPherson.
She was 41 when she was taken from us. She was a carefree spirit, beautiful. She was creative. She was living in BC with her husband, the perpetrator at the time. I'll just call him perpetrator. She was missing for a while. The RCMP helped to solve the case of Myrna Latondra missing, who was missing for 6 years.
Yeah, because when he admitted to killing our sister, he actually admitted to Myrna as well. So,
and it wasn't even the police that told us that link there, that he had killed somebody else. It was actually a reporter that told us that. I just feel so bad for what happened to Myrna's family.
And it was such a short time because my sister met him in January and Myrna went missing in October. So that was only 3 months. So like he took Myrna's life and then met my sister 3 months after that. Moved her into the same house. And I believe like if the police did their job, her DNA was so fresh in that house because he murdered her in that house. Her DNA was everywhere. So if they took the family serious, they begged the police, they told them, you gotta go and question him, but they wouldn't go.
It's just, another Indigenous woman that's missing, and she's this, she's that. And even when our sister went missing and they were different media were reporting it, they were describing my sister as a prostitute. And I remember calling one of them, I'm like, how could you describe my sister as a prostitute? Well, that's what we heard. And I'm like, you don't even have the facts. Like, take that out. It's so disrespectful. It's just, how can you be a journalist or a media person if that's what you're going to do? So that needs to change. I mean, she was a mother, she was a daughter, she was our sister,
Just disregard, no sense of empathy. Even when we found out how she was taken, I read it on an article. I don't know which article it was, but they shared every single detail of what he did, how he took her life. He recorded her death, It was so like devastating, and I will never heal from that. I'm traumatized forever. Just to actually have to read that without being told ahead of time, this is what's going to be released onto the media.
You know, yeah, so journalists need to be trained properly. They need to take something on trauma informed when they're dealing with writing stories about things like this. Yeah, I mean, like, they're a voice. And when families go through crisis, sometimes it's hard to use your voice. So journalists, you have an opportunity to be the family's voice. Use it, you know, it's like, hey, something is wrong in our society. These calls for justice aren't happening.
This birch bark canoe is over 100 years old. After decades of sitting in storage across Quebec and Minnesota, its new home is in Kahnawake at the Kanien'kehá:ka Ungwawana Rowdy Jokwa Language and Cultural Center.
Everybody was so happy to see the canoe, to see the shape of it, knowing the age of it.
The Cultural Center is breaking ground on a new building next month. It will include a museum where the canoe will be permanently on display.
We've always spoken about museums and how they have collections, Indigenous collections that are always being held for us. This is part of the work, you know, in bringing these items back to the community and back to our people, back where they belong, back home.
The canoe was donated by Walt Gordon, who grew up in Montreal and now lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's been in his family for 3 generations, but not much is known about its history.
This canoe entered my family's life on the Richelieu River, somewhere, you know, between the border and the St. Lawrence. A friend of my grandfather purchased it from a Mohawk man that was paddling his canoe on the river.
Gordon reached out to the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake about giving the canoe to the community.
When I thought about it, it was just like, this just feels like it's the right thing, like this is where it belongs.
Chief Harry Rice traveled to Minnesota last week to retrieve the canoe.
It was heartwarming. It was really nice to bring back a piece of Kahnawake back to Kahnawake.
Rice extended the invitation to Gordon to visit Kahnawake when the new museum opens to the public in 2025. Candace O'Deer, CBC News, Kahnawake.
Hi, I'm Rudy Kelly, the subject and co-creator of the new CBC podcast, The Herb Original. Today, we're going to be hearing the incredible story of survival of my lifelong friends, Leonard and Mona Alexie, who've been married for over 70 years after meeting in the infamous Miller Bay Hospital. They now reside in their home village, Black Willam's.
So as a child, I grew up in a camp setting, like wilderness, with animals and salmon and trapping. That was our lifestyle in those days for survival. And we would come here in the wintertime, spend a few months in Lac Willam's. And Shirley was the first one. Your mom was a good friend of ours. And to me and my cousins, it was a lovely life. It was freedom. And then for some reason, my Aunt Peggy was in Port Edward. They had work going there. So my parents took us over to visit. And I often wonder why, but they didn't return to Loch Lambs. They just got employment at Port Ed. It was a beautiful community because from all over the districts, all over the areas, up and down the coast, it seemed like they all come to Port Ed for employment. And there's one happy community. Everybody knew everybody, although you're from different communities. It was just a friendly place. It was so good. And this was right after the war.
What was your first reaction, if you could tell us about that, when you went and saw a cannery for the first time?
For myself, because of the way I grew up. I was more or less out there in the wilderness with the animals and everything. To work in a cannery, it was so amazing. It was so loud, and a different smell there, and not fresh air like I grew up. It was like a circus. It was just music, the cans coming, the music, and the motors going.
The living conditions there, certainly when Irwin took me out for a tour, because Irwin was the one who really remembered Port Ed a lot, and he told me about how they lived on a dock in a small shack that all of them had to sleep in, and they had to go out to get water, a bucket of water and that. Could you tell me about your experience? Was it similar to that?
Well, where we lived, my mom and dad, my sister Betty, my brother Herbie, myself. There's 5 of us. They had their little rooms, a 1-bedroom shack, I guess you'd call cannery row house. It was very crowded. It was very cold over the water. It was very damp. And our facilities were outdoors. And that's cold. Cannery row was meant just for summertime. But there's employment sometimes during the winter. It was not built for that. And it's awfully cold. I know Leonard's worked there a few winters. It was very hard for our native people. I find it hard because it was, there was a lot of discrimination even that late in my lifetime, which was more in my parents' time.
Now you got sick too, right, when you were
Yeah, I got sick in Port Ed.
Tell us about that, about how you got sick. And
This was about the time when there was so much tuberculosis breakout. And I ended up in Miller Bay Hospital. They didn't give me much hope. I was there for 3 years, and each year when you get a treatment, it would last a year. It was experimental treatments for Native people, but I find that the treatments there are very harsh. I know I used to cry every week when I get that's when they collapse your lung and they put a needle in your tummy without freezing it.
Did they tell you why they collapsed you?
They pumped the air in there. The needles were not fine. They had the air, oxygen had to go through that, which is not, other people don't suffer as much as I did, but there was something in there that stopped the needle and they just ran it in there. And that's why I used to cry.
She had a hole in her lung the size of a 50-cent piece. That's why they had to collapse it to rest her lungs. She couldn't do anything. She couldn't comb her hair.
Yeah, that's the
brush her
first year.
teeth, nothing.
First year, you just lay flat on your back. Couldn't comb your hair, couldn't wash your face. Everybody has to do it for you to show you're still and your lungs are not exerting itself. And then the second year, I got injection twice a day for a whole year. And my rear end. It got to the point where I couldn't walk very much. The third year, I figured I was going home the second year. But the third year, they came back for the same treatment, twice a day. And this time I really cried because that hurts.
And then, all of a sudden, that guy shows up at some point?
That's where I met this guy. They had a visiting, the patients visit just on Christmas.
Oh, okay.
So I met him for 5 minutes. Then they sent him to residential school the next day. To him, that was the beginning. To me, that was the end.
What was your first impression of Leonard?
I didn't know him. I didn't know him. I know he was from Loch Alliance, but I never met him. I knew him as a child, but then we went different ways.
Leonard's mother had passed away giving birth to him, so he ended up moving in with his aunt who lived in King Colas, in the Nass.
Okay.
Yeah. So he lived in King Colas for 7 years, and he only knew how to speak Nishka. And then his aunt's husband had passed away, and they had to move back from King Colas to Loch Lambs. So then he had a harsh life here in Loch Lambs for the next 3 years, and then he ran away to Port Edward to be with his brother and his father. He found out his father was alive, so he moved in with them in Port Edward. And then him and his brother heard there was a new thing out called family allowance, and so they wanted to get their share because it was meant for kids. And they both, Uncle Johnny and Leonard, both walked from Port Edward to Prince Rupert to the government office to collect their money. And that's where the Indian agent found Dad. And that's when they sent him to Port Alberni at the age of 10, 9 or 10. And he stayed there for the next 7 years. While he was in Port Alberni, his father had died of TB, so he became an orphan then. So they kept him there. They didn't send him home.
Oh, that's why the 7 years.
Yeah, and they did finally send him to Miller Bay because he contacted TB in Port Alberni Residential School. So they sent him back to Miller Bay, and that's where he first saw my mother. And if you remember, my mother was lying in bed for a whole year. She couldn't move. She couldn't do anything. And so my mother was trying to discourage my father. Find somebody else.
What did you say? How were you trying to discourage him?
Well, he was in Alberni at this time, and he wrote letters. And you couldn't read these letters. But it took me a while to read it. And that's after he came back from school. I was still in a hospital. I didn't know how long I'd be there. That I don't know if I'll ever get home. I had no idea if I would. So 3 years, nah, go on, go. But he didn't listen. In the meantime, I got to like him. He was very friendly, and he was easy, happy-go-lucky guy. But I didn't have my hopes up too high because, like I said, I didn't know if I was ever coming home. So I was there 3 years and I did come home and from the hospital. Then I have a whole year of transition. But then we got married in 52. And
7 years
we
after the
had-
Second World War ended.
we had my eldest son, Art, that same year. And like he said, we wanted more, bigger family. But it took 5 years before Peter came along, and that was it. So through the years, it was okay. Then 20 years into our marriage is when I found out about Leonard's experience at the residential school. He didn't mention anything. It was like a puzzle that was some parts missing in his life. So when he stood up in Civic Center at a conference, he told his story. That's the first time I heard it.
I was in Miller Bay first, and then I stayed at Miller Bay. Then they sent me down to Alberni. I liked Alberni. It was a beautiful place. Nice lake. But there was a lot of pedophiles in our school. For the second week I was there, and one of these guys came in, take the kid that was laying next to me, next bed. Then he came back crying. I didn't know why, but I soon found out. A lot of pedophiles in that school.
I sat there like different colors of rainbow. My emotions. I was crying so hard for this little boy that went through all that experience. This is when we found out, and then I had Art and Peter come together, and we talked to him. I told the children not everything, but that he needed our help, that we have to help him. And he went in a deep spin after that, after opening up. His life just went out, just so much hurt in him. It wasn't until my mother and I had gone to church every Sunday, and he drops us off, and he wouldn't come in. He had this thing against the churches. But he dropped us off. Then finally he came. And then his life sort of changed after that.
Up until that point in his life, and a better part of my life, he really struggled with the after effects of residential school. He became an alcoholic. He became a deep alcoholic, would hide his drinks everywhere, would self-medicate on his own. And for the longest time, we didn't understand why he was going through all this all the time. And it wasn't until when he stood up in the Civic Center and talked about his experience in residential school that we finally understand. I can attest that it just doesn't stop with Dad. It runs in the family, intergenerational. So our whole family, because of the residential school, really struggled to keep together. And it wasn't it was because of Mom that helped us keep together. And when he turned his life around, he was a very, very good person. He was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of drinker because of residential school. He'd be very sweet as a dad one day, and the next moment he could be somebody totally different because he was fighting those demons inside.
Oh, down, where was this lady telling her story?
In the Civic Center.
So yeah, Civic Center. Hey, I said to myself, she's telling my story at residential school. All the pedophiles. It was just but with God's help, like we're very religious family, my wife and I.
You know, at the time he opened up the Civic Center, there was no counselors at that time, not one. He broke down and the others broke down. So I also had to learn how to handle this. It was very difficult. So we really struggled because we had no counseling.
And he did end up taking the church and Canada to court. There was about 8 of them altogether, and they won because of his testimony and those of the small group of men that came forward for everybody. He endured, again, their endless questions. There were many lawyers on their side and only one on Dad's side. He was the one that changed everything. He was the one that got Prime Minister Stephen Harper to stand up in Parliament. It was him and that other group that came forward at the very beginning. So what he got out of all that is just nothing. It's just peanuts to them. But it did change the whole system, the school system, the judicial system. And that's not the first change that Dad brought into Canada. He was also there for to help put together the first all-native basketball tournament. It's going on for 70 years now, or 60.
No, it was in 1960, so 63 years old now.
63. He was also there for responsible for the first Friendship Center in Canada, which is now Canada-wide. And he was the one that paid the city $1 to buy a piece of land to start to buy a building to start the Friendship Center in Canada.
You guys have lived in Rupert probably for longer than anywhere else, I imagine?
Yeah, 57. You were about a month old.
Yeah.
57 up to 8 years ago, 10 years ago.
And then you guys went down to Richmond for a while?
7
And now
years.
here you are.
Complete
in Lac
circle.
Willam's complete circle. Talk about that, about your journey making it back to Lac Willam's and how you feel being back in Lac Willam's.
Well, for both of them to decide to come home, I had a lot of thoughts about that, but I'm slowly getting to know what's going on here, and I really like it. I love the pool. We go every day, and I do a lot of craft work with the clinic. I find that without the clinic and the pool staff, there's really not much. But we're at the point now also where we're slowing down, so I like it.
Okay.
I don't know about these guys.
And you love the pool, right, Leonard? You love the swimming pool.
Oh, love it.
And now, how long has it been then, if we look at that? You just, what anniversary?
It would be 71 this July.
71 years. You think it'd go that long, Len?
Yeah, the people said you can't marry same tribe. That's good. Yeah, love has no tribe.